Tristan Kumar's Dying Planet, The Season of Chaos. Narrated by Tristan Kumar. Part 23. A New Life. I turned around, looking at Sylvie in shock. Now, I was really confused. Sylvie? It's you! Were you the person on the ship I saw earlier? I asked, but she said nothing. You're not my Sylvie, are you? I asked curiously. Listen to me, Rai. I know that you want answers, but right now we need to stop that ship from going to its next destination, Sylvie said. What? I tried to follow along. Where is it going next? Isn't it just moving around the system? No. The person who told you to stay on this planet will redirect the ship to a black hole and then escape, she said. I looked at her in terror. Who is this person you're talking about? Jamal Wallace. But you may know him as, she said. The Dark King, I finished angrily. I gritted my teeth. All right, fine, but how can I trust you? We just met, and I thought you were dead, I said. Listen, we have no time to waste. I can explain everything later. You just need to trust me, she said. I thought about it for a minute and finally agreed. She pulled out a disc from my pocket and placed it on her chest. A black and purple suit started to form over her body. A helmet also formed over her head, but her visor was white, unlike mine. I put on my suit and my helmet as well. We both got ready to jump and fly to the ship to hijack it and keep it on its course. I looked at Sylvie, and she nodded. Finally back together. We jumped into the air and flew toward the ship. I opened my eyes and was immediately blinded by the bright sun and the loud sounds around me. I stood up in the street and looked around. My plan supposedly worked. I smiled as I took in the scenery of Las Vegas. I started to walk across the street to the sidewalk to get out of the way of cars in the street. I continued to walk down the street, looking around in shock. Many people in crazy attire looked at me strangely, as I had tattered, dirty clothes, something supposedly not regular for them, which I could agree. I walked down the sidewalk until I finally reached the same yellow building I had seen earlier, this time fully in color. I walked toward the fountain as it shot out pristine water. I smiled joyfully as I walked around it into the casino. People eyed me suspiciously, as I was probably not supposed to be there. I looked up at the colorful ceiling above me. I went to the front desk, and the receptionist looked at me. Hello, I said awkwardly, as everyone looked at me while continuing to walk. Hello, can I help you? The receptionist said. Yes, I looked at the receptionist's name tag. It read Christine. Christine, I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions, Christine. She was confused about how I had guessed her name, but she looked down at her name tag and nodded in understanding. Yes, ask right ahead. Okay, I was wondering what the day it was. Could you tell me? I asked, nervously, trying not to act stupid. Squinting her eyes at me, she looked at her watch. It's the 22nd. Of? I asked for more information. December, she said, making it seem more obvious. I'm so sorry, but what is the year again? I asked quietly. Some people walking by overheard me and looked very confused at me. Christine sighed. It's 2033 in case you've forgotten, hun. Okay, and one more question. Where am I exactly? I asked. Christine quietly pressed a button under her desk and said to me, I'm sorry, young lady. I'll have to let security escort you back outside. Wait, I'm not homeless. I'm just a little lost. I don't know where I am or where to go, I said desperately as security started to drag me away. That sounds like someone that a lost homeless person would say, Christine yelled as she picked up the phone. I was dragged out of the doors and thrown onto the ground. Hey, let me back in, I yelled as the security guards threw me as they walked inside. Go away, kid, you don't belong here, they said as they walked back inside. I sludged down the street sadly. They were right. I didn't belong here. I didn't even know where I was precisely anyway. I walked past the fountain and back to the sidewalk. I started to walk across the street using a sidewalk. But suddenly a car came speeding at me. I stood in terror, not daring to move. The car started honking wildly as I stared at it. The car eventually came so close to me that I tried to move but still couldn't. It was like my feet were planted still, like roots in a tree. Right before the car would hit me, I put my hands to cover my face. Everyone watched as the car hit my hand, but my hand emitted a red transparent web. The web wrapped around the car, and it suddenly vanished. I opened my eyes and looked around. The car was nowhere to be seen, while everyone was staring at me. I looked at my hands in confusion and ran back to the sidewalk quickly. I started to jog up the sidewalk away from the people staring at me. Everyone had their phones out and were recording me. I eventually ran into the Bellagio again. Christine rolled her eyes at me as the security guards came at me again. They dived at me, but I rolled on the ground below them. They tripped over each other as I ran deeper and deeper into the casino. I looked around at all the people inside the casino in amazement. They were all laughing, drinking, and betting. I turned around and saw more security officers yelling at me, though they could barely be heard because of everything else that was going on. I ran to the elevator and started to go up. I watched as the security guards were left behind on the bottom floor as I rose to the top. On the top floor, I got off. A lot of people looked at me as I ran out of the elevator. I ran to the stairs going to the dome at the top, but it was locked. I turned and went to the hallways to the suites. I started running down the halls. Eventually, I reached the end and busted through a door. There was no one inside, so I ran to a window. I looked out at the city in fear. What was going on with me? Suddenly, I heard a knocking on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw some security guards. I hid behind the bed as they started to bust through. They eventually did and saw me. They grabbed me brutally and threw me outside. One of the guards reached for their handcuffs, so I stood up and started to run. They eventually tackled me and pushed me against the wall. I got arrested, and they started to walk me back down the hallway to the elevator. Suddenly, the ground 20 feet ahead of them burst open, and a figure jumped up from the floor below. They had all black clothes with a mask on. They also had 2 knives in their outstretched arms. One of the guards walked toward the person, who slowly looked up at them. "Hey!" they yelled at the person. "Who the?" they started to yell. But the person with the knives suddenly threw a knife at the guard. I watched as the guard's head jerked back. The guard dropped to his knees and fell over, blood gushing out of his head. His head faced the other guard and me. The knife was still lodged into his eyes as blood was pouring out of his wound. I almost threw up. The other guard let go of me and picked up his radio. "We need backup! We need backup! We've got a killer on the top floor!" he yelled into his radio as the person got closer with the other knife. We both started to back up away from the person. The person grabbed the other knife from the dead guard and wiped the dripping blood off of his arm. The person slowly reached for the small black ball behind him. He rolled the ball to the guard, who was still pointing his gun at him. The guard picked up the ball and looked at it in confusion. He turned it over and saw a countdown, which was already at 0 seconds. "Oh, shit," the guard began to say, but was cut off by the explosion. I flew toward the person with the knives from the impulse of the explosion. I looked back at the guard. He had flown out of the open wall behind us, a bloody, gory mess. I closed my eyes, thinking that the person would kill me next, but it didn't. Instead, they unveiled themselves. I didn't recognize them, though. "Hi there," they said. "I'm Jamal Wallace, but I'm also known as the Dark King," he said. I thought that his face was familiar from the only vision I had of the person carrying me through the rubble, but I was definitely mistaken. "Do I know you?" I was confused. "No. Well, I don't think you should," he said. "Anyway, I saw your powers on the streets, and I need you." "What?" I was confused because I had to join a stranger that I had just met to go somewhere after he had killed 2 people. "I mean, unless you want to die," he started. No thanks." "Okay, fine, I'll go," I said, trying to control myself after this wild day. "Huh, cool. We're going to Los Angeles," he said as he put on his mask. "Wait, what?" I asked. "Yeah, you said you didn't want to die, right?" he said as he started to run down the hall. "What about my hand?" I asked. "Already done," he yelled back as I looked at my hands, which were suddenly free. I looked confusedly at them, but then ran after him. We both waited for the elevator, but when it opened, 3 more guards stepped out. Their eyes widened. "We got a visual on the killers," one of the guards yelled into the radio. Jamal suddenly grabbed the guard who had spoken and said, "Yes, now you do see me," he said as he threw the guard out of the window. But now you don't." "Geez, do you have to be so violent all the time?" I asked him in fear, but he had already grabbed his knives. Yes," he simply responded. He threw them both at the guards before they could even fire at him. They left a blood streak on the wall of the elevator as they slid down. He grabbed their bodies and dragged them out as we both stepped in. He pressed the buttons for the bottom floor. I avoided touching the walls of the elevator to make me look like the killer as well as we descended the elevator. We finally reached the bottom, but the door didn't open. We heard the sound of something cutting through the wall, and we looked up. Someone was trying to get in. I started to express my concerns, but he pulled out a small gun with a spike at the end. It almost looked like a small harpoon gun. The small section of the ceiling dropped down, and he shot through it. Unluckily, there was a SWAT officer who moved in the way and got impaled. The harpoon bullet reached far up the elevator. Jamal jumped up and looked at the SWAT officer's belt. He had a grenade in his hand. Jamal took the grenade out and dropped the harpoon gun. Somehow, the officer was sent flying up to the spike, which was pinned against the wall. The SWAT officer yelled in pain as he was pinned against the wall and reached for his gun, but Jamal pulled the pin and threw the grenade at him. We both moved away from the hole as we heard the gouge speed. Mother of... as the explosion went off. Alarms finally started blaring as we heard people starting panicking through the gap of the blast. The elevator doors started to get busted open, so we both climbed out onto the roof of the elevator, the blood still dripping onto us. Jamal pulled out another small black bomb and dropped it in the elevator. We started to climb the elevator shaft as it exploded once the guards came in. Through the gap of the explosion from the SWAT officer, we could see that the officers' bodies went flying back into the crowd. Jamal seemed to smile as I looked in terror. He grabbed a sword attached to his back and jumped down through the gap. Once he landed, he rolled in front of a guard and stabbed him. He pulled his sword through the guard's body and he fell to the ground. More and more people screamed as he massacred more and more guards. Eventually, after killing one guard, he turned around and got shot in the side. He winced at the pain and yelled as he hunched over. He kicked the guard and elbowed his face as he was on his knees. He got his fists and started bashing them on his head. Eventually, with blood all over the guard, he grabbed the sword and stabbed him in the heart. The guard limped over as he started to lift his sword with the guard on it like a human kebab. I slid back down to the elevator and went into the crowd. Now, there was no one left inside except for 20 more guards, Jamal, and me. I stood in the elevator as I watched Jamal rip apart the guards individually. Eventually, after being bathed in blood, he went to the elevator and retrieved me. "What the hell did you do?" I yelled at him as I walked out of the building with him. "All right, we're going to Los Angeles now," he said as he put his sword back into his sheath. "No, we are not," I yelled as he walked outside. He looked around on the sidewalk, but suddenly was shot in the shoulder. He turned around as a man in a suit stepped out of the smoke. He was old. "Chris," Jamal said. "Who is Chris?" I asked him in confusion, but he was already fighting with him. Eventually, Jamal was flown back to me. Chris walked towards me, but Jamal stood up and got in the way of Chris and me. Chris pulled out his gun and shot Jamal in the chest. He fell to the ground. "What the hell?" I yelled in confusion and fear. "You're next," Chris's wheezy voice said. He pulled out a gun and pointed it right at my forehead. I heard a gunshot and saw a white flash as I closed my eyes and screamed. I suddenly woke up in the back of a car, breathing heavily and looking around. I was still in Las Vegas, and the person driving the car was Jamal. I panicked as he looked back at me. "What the hell?" he started, but I opened the door. It was locked. "Let me out! Let me out!" I started to scream in terror. Whoa, what's wrong?" he said as he pulled over. "You're dead, and you killed like a million people," I said. "What? I got you out of the hotel. All I did was knock some guys out in the hallway," he said. What about the elevator and the harpoon gun?" I asked. "What about it? We rode the elevator down and left." "What harpoon gun anyway?" he asked. I felt around my face expecting to feel a gunshot wound, but there was nothing. "Sorry, I guess it was a dream, I guess." "That's one hell of a dream then," he said as we continued driving. He looked out of the window as he said to himself, "Harpoon gun. Oh, that's pretty good. I should use that." He turned on the radio, which was playing classic rock. He started tapping his fingers on the steering wheel as we drove through Las Vegas Strip as the sun set down upon us. We finally came in sight of seeing the ship. We slowly came to a halt next to the ship and walked on the side. We went to a hatch and pulled it open. After we stepped inside, the oxygen started to refill the room. The door opened to the hallway, and we started to jog around the hallway to see the stairs going up to the main deck. Right before entering the main deck, someone walked out. Both Sylvia and I ran back down the stairs before they got a look at us. They walked by, and we headed into the deck. It was empty because everyone was probably asleep or doing something else. We headed to the control panel as Sylvie started to type some coordinates into the panel. She typed in the numbers 1001, 2380, 155, 4882, 6730, 572, 4662, 6861.190. Not this again, I thought to myself. "What are you doing?" I asked. "We're taking this ship somewhere else," she said as she finished typing the rest of the numbers. "Yeah, I can see that. But where?" I said cluelessly. She rolled her eyes. "Here." She pulled the lever forward and we jerked forward. We sped through space as we headed toward the coordinates she had entered in. Sylvie smiled as we started to slow down. We finally stopped and I stood back up. We were in the middle of nowhere. "Where are we now?" I said, even more confused. "Give it a second," she said. "Give what a sec—" "Oh," I said, as a crack slowly spread across the sky. The crack looked like a glass crack would. Eventually, the crack spread over and around the ship. Sylvie started moving the ship forward until it eventually sucked into the crack. We flew through the white line in space and eventually ended up somewhere completely different. Everything around me was so colorful as it sped by me. I looked through the window in shock as we started to go faster and faster. We eventually stopped, and I opened my eyes. I looked around to see where we were, but Sylvie said, "Put on your helmet." "What?" I asked, trying to look around, but she suddenly jumped out of the window. I heard the door break behind me and people rush in, and I jumped after her to the world below. When I say world below, I can clearly say that there was a world below, but also a world above. We were back in the homeland of Jamal, the place where he was born, created, and trained. I had had too many bad experiences here before, and I did not want to be here again. We eventually landed on the ground. I ejected my helmet and said to Sylvie, who was looking around, "Why are we here?" "Good, you know where we are." "Yes, no, whatever, I don't want to be here," I said. "I thought you said you wanted to help," she said as she looked at me. "Yeah, well," I said, but stopped myself. "Good, then here's your help," she said. She pulled out a sword from her sheath on their back and threw it at the ship. It somehow went straight through the ship and started to come back at her like a boomerang. She left her hand outstretched and it flew back to it. I stared in horror as the ship slowly began to fall in flames. I looked at Sylvie, but all she did was smile. She enjoyed this, but this was nothing at all that I wanted. At that moment, I realized that I was not with Sylvie at all. Instead, I was with someone else, completely different than her. This episode was recorded by Tristan Kumar. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out the next part. And yeah, that's all I really got. This is Dying Planet, the Season of Chaos. And thank you so much for listening. Bye.